You can't go much wrong with this. King Kong vs. Godzilla from 1962. This was the first time we saw Godzilla in colour, indeed Godzilla in 7 odd years, and King Kong in about 2 decades. And that's excluding King Kong appears in Edo. Apparently a box office smash when it was released in Japan, and allegedly the most attended Godzilla film in that country's history to date, which is quite impressive, I would imagine. Although so easy to see why in 1962 a large quantity of that generation's children would have flocked to see this picture. What else would there have been to do in 1962? What more fantastic, sensational experience could one receive in 1962? This was like one of the greatest, if not the greatest, ride which a carnival could ever hope to offer. Ishiro Honda returned to direct this film as he had the original and a number of kaiju and genre films in between 1954 and 1962. Some of his better work to date is in this feature, possibly his first kaiju film in colour. I remember Rodan and Mothra being in black and white, maybe I'm forgetting something. I know 1959's Battle in Outer Space, not a kaiju film, but sci-fi genre flick, was in colour. I will say his work in colour is pretty stellar here, especially given that this was more or less a guaranteed success kaiju bash. But then I guess even large proto-blockbuster extravaganzas had appropriate and tasteful, manicured and filmic set design, staging and direction, at this time anyway. It serves as a tremendous precedent for the even better Mothra vs. Godzilla of 1964, but that's another days. Once one reads that Honda intended for the film to be a satire of the television industry, one doesn't unsee it. Oh my goodness. Does this film make a great case for the television media's plausible pathos upon a catastrophic kaiju disaster occurring, as in this film's narrative? And now I'm going to read out a lot of information which has been posted on this film's Wikipedia article. This may be one of the key cases where, like the Kroll article and my subsequent upload for it, it's so excessively detailed. Well, I don't think excessively, but it's detailed to the point where it may be trimmed one day, so let's preserve it here. I'll read it all out. Well, the most interesting information, I felt. King Kong vs. Godzilla has had its roots in an earlier concept for a new King Kong feature developed by Willis O'Brien, animator of the original stop-motion Kong. Around 1960, O'Brien came up with a proposed treatment, King Kong meets Frankenstein, where Kong would fight against a giant Frankenstein monster in San Francisco. O'Brien took the project, which consisted of some concept art and a screenplay treatment, to RKO to secure permission to use the King Kong character. During this time, the story was renamed King Kong vs. the Ginkgo, when it was believed that Universal had the rights to the Frankenstein name. O'Brien was introduced to producer John Beck, who promised to find a studio to make the film. At this point, RKO was no longer a production company. Beck took the story treatment and hired George Worthing Yates to write the screenplay for the film. The story was slightly altered and the title changed to King Kong vs. Prometheus, returning the name to the original Frankenstein concept. The modern Prometheus was the alternate title of the original novel. The November 2nd, 1960 issue of Variety reported that Beck had even asked a filmmaker named Jerry Duran, a plausible misspelling for a filmmaker Nathan Duran's pseudonym Jerry Duran, to direct the film. Unfortunately, the cost of stop-motion animation discouraged potential studios from putting the film into production. After shopping the script around overseas, Beck eventually attracted the interest of the Japanese studio Toho, which had long wanted to make a King Kong film. After purchasing the script, they decided to replace the giant Frankenstein monster with Godzilla to be King Kong's opponent, and would have Shinichi Sekizawa rewrite Yates' script. The studio thought it would be the perfect way to celebrate its 30th year in production. It was one of 5 big banner releases for the company to celebrate the anniversary alongside Sanjuro, Chushingura, Lonely Lane, and Born in Sin. John Beck's dealings with Willis O'Brien's project were done behind his back, and O'Brien was never credited for his idea. O'Brien attempted to sue Beck but lacked the money to do so, and on November 8, 1962, he died in his home in Los Angeles at the age of 76. O'Brien's wife, Darlene, later cited the frustration of the King Kong vs. Frankenstein deal as the cause of his death. Jesus. Marion C. Cooper, the producer of the 1933 King Kong film, was bitterly opposed to the project, stating in a letter addressed to his friend Douglas Burden, "I was indignant when some Japanese company made a belittling thing to a creative mind called King Kong vs. Godzilla. I believe they even stooped so low as to use a man in a gorilla suit, which I have spoken out against so often in the early days of King Kong." In 1963, he filed a lawsuit to enjoin distribution of the movie against John Beck, as well as Toho and Universal, the film's US copyright holder, claiming that he outright owned the King Kong character, but the lawsuit never went through as it turned out he was not Kong's sole legal owner, as he had previously believed. Director Ishiro Honda wanted the theme of the movie to be a satire of the television industry in Japan. In April 1962, TV networks and their various sponsors started producing outrageous programming and publicity stunts to grab audiences' attention after two elderly viewers reportedly died at home while watching a violent wrestling match on TV. The various rating wars between the networks and banal programming that followed this event caused widespread debate over how TV would affect Japanese culture, with Soichi Oya stating TV was creating a nation of 100 million idiots. Honda stated, "People were making a big deal out of ratings, but my own view of TV shows is that they did not take the viewers seriously, but they took the audience for granted. So I decided to show that through my movie. And the reason I showed the monster battle through the prism of a ratings war was to depict the reality of the times." Honda addressed this by having a pharmaceutical company sponsor a TV show and going to extremes for a publicity stunt for ratings by capturing a giant monster, stating, "All a medicine company would have to do is just produce good medicines, you know." But the company doesn't think that way. They think they will get ahead of their competitors if they use a monster to promote their product. Honda would work with screenwriter Shinichi Sekizawa on developing the story, stating that back then Sekizawa was working on pop songs and TV shows, so he really had a clear insight into television. Special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya was planning on working on other projects at this point in time, such as the new version of a fairy tale film script called Princess Kaguya, but he would postpone those to work on this project with Toho instead, since he was a huge fan of King Kong. He stated in an early 1960s interview with the Mainichi newspaper, "But my movie company has produced a very interesting script that combined King Kong and Godzilla, so I couldn't help working on this instead of my other fantasy films. The script is special to me. It makes me emotional because it was King Kong that got me interested in the world of special photographic techniques when I saw it in 1933. Early drafts of the script were sent back with notes from the studio asking that the monster antics be made as funny as possible. This comical approach was embraced by Tsuburaya, who wanted to appeal to children's sensibilities and broaden the genre's audience. Much of the monster battle was filmed to contain a great deal of humor, but the approach was not favored by most of the effects crew, who couldn't believe some of the things Tsuburaya asked them to do, such as Kong and Godzilla volleying a giant boulder back and forth. With the exception of the next film, Mothra vs. Godzilla, this film began the trend to portray Godzilla and the monsters with more and more anthropomorphism as the series progressed, to appeal more to younger children. Ishiro Honda was not a fan of the dumbing down of the monsters. Years later, Honda stated in an interview, "I don't think a monster should ever be a comical character, and the public is more entertained when the great King Kong strikes fear into the hearts of the little characters." The decision was also taken to shoot the film in a scope rate 2:35:1 scope ratio Toho scope, and to film in color, Eastman color, making both monsters' first widescreen and color portrayals. Toho had planned to shoot the film on location in Sri Lanka, but abandoned the idea after being forced to pay RKO roughly 80 million yen, $220,000, for the rights to the King Kong character, which forced the company to scale down their original production costs. The bulk of the film was shot on the Japanese island of Ishiwashima instead. The movie's production budget came out to 150 million yen, $420,000. Sued actors Shoichi Hirose as King Kong and Haruo Nakajima as Godzilla were given mostly free rein by Tsuburaya to choreograph their own moves. The men would rehearse for hours and would base their moves on those of professional wrestling, a sport that was growing in popularity in Japan, in particular the moves of Toyonobori. During pre-production, Tsuburaya had toyed with the idea of using Willis O'Brien's stop-motion technique instead of the suitmation process used in the first two Godzilla films, but budgetary concerns prevented him from using the process, and the more cost-efficient suitmation was used instead. However, some brief stop-motion was used in a couple of quick sequences. Two of these sequences were animated by Minoru Nakano. A brand new Godzilla suit was designed for this film, and some slight alterations were done to its overall appearance. These alterations included the removal of its tiny ears, 3 toes on each foot rather than 4, and large central dorsal fins and a bulkier body. These new features gave Godzilla a more reptilian dinosaurian appearance. Outside of the suit, a meter-high model and a small puppet were also built. Another puppet, from the waist up, was also designed that had a nozzle in the mouth to spray out liquid mist simulating Godzilla's atomic breath. However, the shots in the film where this prop was employed, far-away shots of Godzilla breathing its atomic breath during its attack on the Arctic military base, were ultimately cut from the film. These cutscenes can be seen in the Japanese theatrical trailer. Finally, a separate prop of Godzilla's tail was also built for close-up practical shots when its tail would be used, such as the scene where Godzilla trips Kong with its tail. The tail prop would be swung off-screen by a stagehand. Sadamasa Arakawa, who worked with Tsuburaya, said that the sculptors had a hard time coming up with a King Kong suit that appeased Tsuburaya. The first suit was rejected for being too fat, with long legs, giving Kong what the crew considered an almost cute look. A few other designs were done before Tsuburaya would approve the final look that was ultimately used in the film. The suit's body design was a team effort by brothers Koyayagi and Kanji Yagi and was covered with expensive yak hair, which Aizo Kai made hand-dyed brown. Because RKO insisted that the face must be different from the original's design, sculptor Taizo Toshimitsu based Kong's face on the Japanese macaque rather than gorilla, and designed two separate masks. As well, two separate pairs of arms were also created. One pair were extended arms operated by poles inside the suit to give Kong a gorilla-like illusion, while the other pair were at normal arm's length and featured gloves that were used for scenes that required Kong to grab items and wrestle with Godzilla. Suit actor Hirose had to be sewn into the suit in order to hide the zipper. This would force him to be trapped inside the suit for large amounts of time and would cause him much physical discomfort. In the scene where Kong drinks the berry juice and falls asleep, he was trapped in the suit for 3 hours. Besides the suit with the two separate arm attachments, a meter-height model and a puppet of Kong used for close-ups were also built. As well, a huge prop of Kong's hand was built for the scene where he grabs Mihama Fumiko and carries her off. For the attack of the giant octopus, 4 live octopuses were used. They were forced to move among the miniature huts by having hot air blown onto them. After the filming of that scene was finished, 3 of the 4 octopuses were released. The 4th became special effects director Tsuburaya's dinner. These sequences were filmed on a miniature set outdoors on the Miura coast. According to assistant special effects cinematographer Koichi Kawakita, the crew had difficulty getting the live octopuses to move. Along with the live animals, 2 rubber octopus puppets were built, with the larger one being covered with plastic wrap to simulate mucus? Some stop-motion tentacles were also covered for the scene where the octopus grabs a native and tosses him. These sequences were shot indoors at Toho Studios. The special effects crew filmed a sequence in which Godzilla rampages through Takasaki, Gunma Prefecture, and destroys the Takasaki Cannon statue, but this scene was cut from the final film. Despite the scene being cut, Godzilla is still said to have passed through Takasaki in the film. Since King Kong was seen as the bigger draw and Godzilla was still considered a villain at this point in the series, the decision was made to not only give King Kong top billing, but also to present him as the winner of the climactic fight. While the ending of the film does look somewhat ambiguous, Toho confirmed that King Kong was indeed the winner in the 1962-63 English-language film program Toho Films Volume 8, which states in the film's plot synopsis, "A spectacular duel is arranged on the summit of Mount Fuji and King Kong is victorious, but after he has won." While producer Tomoyuki Tanaka stated in his 1983 and 1984 books, The Complete History of Toho Special Effects Movies and Definitive Edition Godzilla Introduction, that he believed the battle ended in a draw, Toho still maintained that Kong was the victor on their global website back in the late 2010s. Due to the great box office success of this film, Toho wanted to produce a sequel immediately. Shinichi Sekizawa was brought back to write the screenplay tentatively titled Continuation King Kong vs. Godzilla. Sekizawa revealed that Kong had killed Godzilla during their underwater battle in Sagami Bay with a line of dialogue stating, "Godzilla, who sank and died in the waters off Atami." As the story progressed, Godzilla's body is salvaged from the ocean by a group of entrepreneurs who hope to display the remains at a planned resort. Meanwhile, King Kong is found in Africa, where he had been protecting a baby, the sole survivor of a plane crash. After the baby is rescued by investigators and is taken back to Japan, Kong follows the group and rampages through the country looking for the infant. Godzilla is then revived with hopes of driving off Kong. The story ends with both monsters plummeting into a volcano. The project was ultimately cancelled. A couple of years later, United Productions of America, UPA, and Toho conceived the idea to pit Godzilla against a giant Frankenstein monster and commissioned Takashi Kimura to write a screenplay titled Frankenstein vs. Godzilla, with Jerry Sol and Ruben Berkovich writing the story and synopsis for the film. Jerry Sol, that's a Star Trek original series writer. Korba might maneuver, I believe. However, Toho would cancel this project as well and instead decided to match Mothra against Godzilla in Mothra vs. Godzilla. Great call. This began a formula where kaiju from past Toho films would be added into the Godzilla franchise. Toho was interested in producing a series around their version of King Kong but were refused by RKO. However, Toho would handle the character once more in 1967 to help Rankin Bass co-produce their film King Kong Escapes, which is loosely based on a cartoon series Rankin Bass had produced. Henry G. Saperstein was impressed with the giant octopus scene and requested a giant octopus to appear in Frankenstein Conquers the World and The War of the Gargantuas. The giant octopus appeared in an alternate ending for Frankenstein Conquers the World that was intended for overseas markets but went unused. As a result, the octopus instead appeared in the opening of The War of the Gargantuas. The film's King Kong suit was recycled and altered to depict Goro in the second episode of Ultra Q, and the suit's torso was later reused to portray King Kong in the water scenes of King Kong Escapes. Filmmaker Shizuo Nakajima recreated several scenes from this film in his 1983 fan film Legendary Giant Beast Wolfman vs. Godzilla, including the scenes where Godzilla emerges from an iceberg and attacks a train during his rampage on the Japanese mainland. In 1990, Toho expressed interest in remaking the film as Godzilla vs. King Kong. However, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka stated that obtaining the rights to King Kong proved difficult. Toho then considered producing Godzilla vs. Mechani Kong, but effects director Koichi Kawakita confirmed that obtaining the likeness of King Kong also proved difficult. Mechani Kong was replaced by Mechagodzilla, and the project was developed into Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 in 1993. Nice. In October 2015, Legendary Pictures announced plans for a King Kong vs. Godzilla film of their own, unrelated to Toho's version, which was released in the United States on March 31st, 2021, simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max, and we'll discuss that another day also.